This is a question that I got in the Straight Up Fishing app a few days ago about the best crankbait rod that you could possibly use to fish a crankbait, which meaning a lipless crankbait, rattle trap, squarebill crankbaits. This is from Rick Johnson. Rick says, Brian, I've heard you mention several times that a graphite composite rod is the best rod for fishing small crankbaits with. Can I use my traditional graphite rods? Okay, I love this question. So that was a two-part question, I would say. Let me answer the easy part that he asked first. He asked, can he use his traditional graphite rod for throwing a crankbait? Abso-freaking-lutely. Let me not try to act like when I first started fishing that I had a specific rod for every technique and every bait. I did not start out that way. In the beginning, I had 3 bait casters and I had 2 spinning rods. And I don't care if I was fishing for striper, crappie bass, spotted bass, smallmouth, whatever I was fishing for, I used them 3 bait casters and I used them 2 spinning rods. And they were all about the same action, power, all the same. So yes, you can do it. Now I'm to a spot where I may take a crankbait and I may fish a crankbait solid 10, 12 hours for 6, 7 days in a row. So once you start to fish a bait that much, you start to notice little nuances that make it more efficient to use other products. And you find little tweaks and little things that work better. Maybe you hook a fish better. Maybe you can cast a little bit better. Maybe a little bit more accurate with a certain type of rod, reel, or line. If we're being completely honest, you can fish just about any bait with any rod, with any reel, with any line. So I want to clear that part up before we even get started talking about this next part. When I talk about crankbait fishing, I almost always, I'm just going to go ahead and say I always fish a graphite composite rod. I'll even use a glass rod too. Now, why do I do that? I like a moderate power, moderate tapered graphite composite rod for a few reasons. A lot of the small crankbaits I throw, squarebills, shad wraps, even some of the medium divers that I throw, they're really light. Honestly, they're kind of hard to throw. A lot of those little crankbaits that we throw for shallow fishing around rocks and riprap, a lot of those baits they don't throw that easily. They get in the air and they spin around and helicopter around. They're already light. Some of them, the bill is about half as long as the plug is. So it's just not that easy to throw them, especially a balsa plug. So a graphite composite rod has got more tip in it. When I say more tip, I'm not going to do it this time. Heck, why not? It's got a little bit more it's got a little bit more of that in it. So it loads better. When I go to rear back and make my back cast and make the line, you see how this rod is going to, the further back it loads, it's like a slingshot. The easier the rod does the work for me on the cast. It's like a slingshot, it pulls it back, and with a stiff rod, because it doesn't load near as heavily, when it goes to fling it out, it just does it real fast and it's not as long and gradual. Not a fling, it's more like a flick. And so it's harder to cast and you get more backlashes with those stiffer rods. A little bit slower rod, softer rod, it'll cast those baits a little bit better. Listen, have you ever wanted to just drop everything and just focus on fishing for like 3 or 4 days solid? Good. Load up your boat, load up your camper, load up your dog, your family, your wife, whatever farm animals you got, and come to Calhoun Falls State Park for my fishing retreat that I'm having March 27th through March 30th. For the first 2 days of the fishing retreat, we're just gonna focus on fishing, and then I'll be there to guide you along the way to tell you the best areas of the lake to fish on Lake Russell, which is where we're having the event, and some of the best lures that you can throw. All the details you need to know about my straight up fishing retreat at Calhoun Falls State Park at Lake Russell, March 27th through March 30th, you can find at shopblat.com. That's a lot to say. I can't believe I got that in one take. Graphite composite is what I prefer. I'm actually developing one now for level rods. If you're new to my channel, now I am working with level rods. Level rods was fortunate enough, I was fortunate enough for them to let me design 3 specific rods: a spinning rod, a crankbait rod, and a multi-purpose graphite composite rod for lipless crankbaits, deeper diving crankbaits, medium diving crankbaits, and chatterbaits. The one I'm talking about now is going to be the rod for the question that I was asked about, the best rod for throwing small to medium sized crankbaits. That would be, to give you an example of what I'm talking about, a Bill Lewis MR6, a Squarebill RC 1.5, or the Strike King, what's the KVD little plug, KVD 1.5s, your balsa plugs, any of those plugs, this is the rod for it. Now, this rod is a prototype, but I can tell you exactly what it is and maybe you can match it to it. But I would love to have you buy one of my signature series rods from Level this summer when we finish this prototype rod. This is a 6'10" graphite composite. It's a moderate action. It's a medium moderate. Okay, why 6'10"? Why don't you use a 7? Why don't you use a 7.5? What I found out is the longer the rod is, sometimes you tend to overpower the bait with the rod. Over time, it's almost like we've started to use such long rods that we're starting to get to the point where we're overworking our baits. A lot of these baits, I've mentioned this before, certain baits have a speed limit. Certain crankbaits. I'm gonna try to draw this out to you the best I can. If I were to take a Fritz Side 5, the speed limit on a Fritz Side 5 versus my handmade gulp plug, which is just a handmade crankbait, the Fritz Side 5 has a higher speed limit than the handmade crankbait. This is what I mean by that. The faster I reel that Fritz Side 5, it never runs out of the water. It never leaves center. It stays and tracks perfectly the same all the way back to the boat. That balsa plug, because it's handmade, there's so many little nuances in that crankbait. At some point, it'll want to track off center and may come out of the water the faster I reel it. You might get one every once in a while that runs exactly perfect. I know. Somebody's saying already, well, my balsa plugs that I get from Earl down the street, they're the best running plugs. All right, Billy, you got me there. But most of the handmade plugs, I make a few plugs myself and I bought several handmades over the years. They have a speed limit and it's much slower than a manufactured bait is. And so, for that very reason, I use slower gear ratio reels and shorter rods. 7'2", 7'5", 7'6". You're just gonna overpower that bait with that longer rod. We're so used to using big rods, but I can't explain it, but I can feel it in my hands. You just overwork that bait. So I like a 6'10". It handles those small baits. The moderate action casts that bait a lot better. So that's 2 reasons. The last reason for the graphite composite. And then we'll be done with this discussion. Lastly, it's just hookup ratio and fighting the fish. That's it. Hookup ratio and fighting the fish is why I use graphite composite. There's not a better product that I've found, especially for winter cranking, to keeping a fish hooked. You probably never thought about this, but hear me out on this. Cold water cranking. Anytime you have any kind of, whether it's plastic, metal, anything, it's harder when it's cold. I truly believe a fish's mouth, a bass's mouth, is a little bit harder in cold weather. That water temperature is 40 degrees. If you were to take any kind of piece of plastic or cardboard or anything and try to bend it around in the cold weather versus 95-degree heat, it's gonna feel a lot different. And so I don't believe that your hooks penetrate the bass's mouth quite as good in cold weather. Hence why you get a lot of skin hooked fish. Now, once I do get that skin hooked fish, he's just barely got a hook hanging out of the skin or his face or back of the fin. So many I'll call them back of the fin or on the side of him. With a stiff rod, you're just gonna pull that right out. Think about it, if I put a hook in your clothes, or you get a hook in your blanket, a hook in your car seat or your boat seat, I'm sure y'all seen that before. What do you try to do to get that hook out? When you want to get the hook out, you get a pair of pliers and, come out of there. You tense up and try to get it out there with all your might. And that's basically what you're doing with a stiff rod. But if you wanted to never get that hook out of your sleeve, if you just sit there and if you tried to pull that out with a rubber band, you wouldn't be able to get that out of your clothes. If you try to take a hook out of your clothes with a rubber band, you would never get it out. That's basically what you're doing with these soft, medium, moderate rods, specifically the graphite composite. It's like a rubber band. Every time he runs, it gives with him. Every time he comes to you, it's so slow to come back to center that he can't get slack in the line to get off. And so the graphite composite works for you. Look for my level fishing 6'10" cranking rod from Level. This is it right here. It's a cork handle. I took it back old school with the cork handles. It's a really smooth looking rod. I think y'all are gonna like it. I've been using it a little bit. I've got 3 or 4 of these now. I think we're getting close to the final production models that you'll see on the shelves. So appreciate you asking that question, Rick. Anybody else have any questions specific to bass fishing that you'd like to have answered? I'd encourage you to join my app. I have an app called Straight Up Fishing. It's where I teach people how to fish. You can join it by going to Apple Play or Google Play or the Apple Store. Download the app, pick a subscription plan. It's $24.99 a month, but I promise you it's worth it. We get to talk one-on-one. I can answer your questions that day about whatever you have with fishing. We have live classes, workshops. You can come to my in-person meetings for free. So join the Straight Up Fishing app so you can get questions like this answered on a daily basis.